The sudden pivot from a staunch defender of open dialogue to someone apparently more concerned with commercial appeal has left many observers stunned. The initial rhetoric was full of bold claims about the restoration of free expression, positioning the platform as a digital town square where all voices, regardless of ideology or popularity, could be heard. This promise tapped into a deep cultural longing for platforms where the rules weren't dictated by corporate interests or opaque moderation guidelines. People rallied behind the idea that finally, someone would protect the sanctity of expression, no matter how controversial or unpopular the viewpoint. But almost immediately after the takeover, the tone changed. The platform's new owner began courting advertisers, offering reassurances that the space would remain safe for brands. In effect, this meant that while the users were promised openness, the advertisers were promised control. That contradiction didn't go unnoticed. Free speech, it seemed, had fine print. The moment the platform's future profitability was at risk, ideological purity gave way to economic pragmatism. This backpedaling wasn't just philosophical, it was strategic. When your business model is reliant on ad revenue, and those advertisers begin to hesitate, suddenly the idea of unmoderated discourse seems less like a virtue and more like a liability. Major brands don't want their products appearing next to hate speech, misinformation, or offensive content. So even as the public was being told that all opinions were welcome, in private meetings, there were reassurances being made that moderation policies would not only remain intact, but might even be reinforced. The comedy in this contradiction writes itself. There's an inherent absurdity in promising the public an uncensored playground while simultaneously whispering to sponsors, "Don't worry, we've got the chaos under control." It's like throwing a wild party and then hiring security to keep the guests from dancing. It turns the whole thing into performance art, freedom as a brand rather than a principle. Observers watching this unfold pointed out the inconsistency with sharp wit and satire. If the mission was really about giving everyone a voice, why so quickly prioritize the comfort of corporations? Why build a narrative around resistance to wokeness or censorship, only to end up in the same boardrooms, making the same concessions that every tech executive eventually makes? There's a painful predictability in watching a disruptor become the very thing they once criticized. Of course, it's not just about hypocrisy. There's also the question of feasibility. Managing a global communication platform means grappling with real-world complexities, legal obligations in different jurisdictions, safety concerns, and the unpredictable behavior of millions of users. What may begin as a romantic vision of radical openness soon collides with lawsuits, regulations, and PR crises. At that point, the idealism that fuels the campaign slogan, freedom, equality, transparency, starts to erode under the pressure of operational reality. Still, the speed and transparency of the shift were jarring. Within days of taking over, the person who once mocked the overly cautious nature of traditional media platforms was now pleading for patience, citing the need to balance freedom with responsibility. A delicate dance began, where every public statement needed to sound defiant, while every private conversation needed to sound reasonable. Satirists seized on this with delight, pointing out that free speech was great until it started costing money. The deeper irony here lies in how speech, something once championed as inherently free, is now being monetized, brokered, and negotiated. It underscores the uncomfortable truth that in modern digital spaces, expression is not an absolute. It is filtered through algorithms, shaped by shareholders, and sanitized for advertisers. The result is a platform that talks like a revolution, but acts like a boardroom. In this contradiction, commentators found fertile ground. They didn't need to exaggerate. The facts were already comical. One day, bold proclamations about liberty and resistance to censorship. The next, carefully worded emails assuring partners that nothing too controversial would be allowed to thrive. What was supposed to be a brave stand became a nervous shuffle. And in that awkward dance between principle and profit, the audience was left laughing, not just at the person in charge, but at the all-too-familiar story of idealism being swallowed by commerce. The idea of charging users for a feature originally meant to signify authenticity ignited immediate backlash and confusion. Verification was once a simple concept, a checkmark to confirm a public figure's identity, shielding users from impersonators and misinformation. It was not a badge of superiority, nor was it supposed to represent status, at least not officially. It was a tool to bring clarity in a space known for its chaos. So when the decision came to put a price tag on this marker, it transformed from a symbol of protection to one of privilege. The justification was cloaked in the language of fairness and democratization. Everyone, it was argued, should have access to verification, not just celebrities or journalists. That sounded noble on the surface. But the catch was, this newfound equality would come with a monthly bill. Suddenly, what was once given based on relevance and public interest became a subscription-based service, leaving many to question the sincerity of the intent. If the goal truly was equity, why attach it to a paywall? This change blurred the lines between identity verification and vanity metrics. People weren't just paying for protection anymore, they were paying to appear important. And in a digital ecosystem where attention is currency, a checkmark became more than a symbol. It was status. Those who could afford it now stood out, while those who couldn't or chose not to pay risked being dismissed as less legitimate, less trustworthy, or simply invisible. Critics were quick to point out the obvious flaw. If everyone is verified, then no one really is. The value of a checkmark depended on its exclusivity and function. It worked because it was reserved for those who met certain criteria, typically relevance, not wealth. By opening it to anyone, with a credit card, the platform diluted its original purpose. Worse still, it introduced a perverse incentive. Impersonation was now easier if one was willing to pay. The very thing the system was meant to prevent became something it could enable. The comedic potential of the situation was hard to ignore. Satirists lampooned the new system as a digital luxury tax, pay up or get buried. The image of users lining up to buy symbols of credibility felt more like a parody of online elitism than a genuine attempt to fix anything. And then came the parodies within the platform itself. Fake accounts with paid checkmarks pretending to be corporations, celebrities, and even politicians. Chaos followed, and with it, a deeper question. Was this really about improving the experience, or just finding another revenue stream? The absurdity grew when people started to ask what exactly they were paying for. Was it just the checkmark? Or were there other benefits to justify the cost? Some new features were promised, but few felt substantial enough to warrant a monthly fee. The backlash wasn't just about money. It was about principle. Many users had come to see the platform as a utility, a place for public discourse. Adding a price to basic features felt like turning a town square into a gated community. Some defenders of the change argued it was a way to weed out bots and improve content quality. But again, this ignored the fundamental flaw. Money doesn't equal authenticity. A scammer with a stolen credit card could be verified faster than a legitimate journalist without disposable income. The platform, in effect, was saying, pay us and we'll vouch for you, no questions asked. The system didn't promote trust, it undermined it. Comedians and commentators jumped on the irony. If the goal was to elevate voices and create a more equal platform, why not simply verify everyone who wanted it for free? Why make authenticity a paid privilege? The jokes wrote themselves. One suggestion was to give every single user a checkmark, thereby removing its meaning entirely. A satirical way of saying, if everyone is special, no one is. The reaction from users wasn't just humorous. It was visceral. Many longtime participants saw it as a betrayal of the platform's core values. It wasn't just about it was about shifting the balance from community to commerce. Users weren't investing in better content or features. They were paying to be seen, to matter, to exist in an increasingly algorithm-driven world. The whole thing became less about free speech and more about paid reach. In the end, the attempt to monetize verification didn't just fail to democratize the platform, It exposed how easily trust could be sold, and how quickly the line between public service. The digital landscape was supposed to be a space of unbounded possibility, where information flowed freely and communities formed across borders. But what happens when those same platforms become conduits for hate, amplified in real time? Following a high-profile leadership change, one particular platform saw an immediate measurable surge in hate speech. Specifically, a reported 500% increase in the use of a deeply offensive racial slur. That figure wasn't abstract. It represented thousands of moments where users, emboldened by the perception of loosened moderation, decided to test the limits of what they could now get away with. This wasn't a sudden eruption born of random coincidence. It was a signal, clear and coordinated, that the worst elements of the internet saw an opportunity. The new leadership's rhetoric around free speech and platform openness, however vague or well-intentioned, had been interpreted by bad actors as a green light. In online forums, extremist groups had reportedly discussed plans to flood the platform with hate to reclaim what they saw as a space lost to political correctness and censorship. What followed wasn't an accident. It was a campaign. Observers, comedians, and cultural critics responded with the kind of scathing wit that often accompanies social commentary. One particularly sharp voice pointed out that if offensive language were monetized, the platform could suddenly become highly profitable. Charge people to use hate speech, the suggestion went, and the platform will never run out of cash. It was satire, of course, but rooted in the tragic absurdity of the moment. When ugliness becomes so abundant that it can be measured in percentages and profit predictions, something has clearly gone wrong. The platform's trust and safety teams scrambled. Publicly, there were reassurances. Content moderation policies were still in place, hate speech remained prohibited, and systems were working to catch violators. But the damage had already been done. The initial spike had sent a message, not just to those who were targeted by the hate, but to everyone watching. It demonstrated how thin the line was between a platform's rules and its reality. It showed how quickly things could spiral when people believed there were no longer consequences for cruelty. This event reignited a broader debate about the limits of free expression and the responsibilities of tech companies. While everyone agrees on the value of open discourse, few would argue that slurs and targeted harassment deserve protection. The question wasn't whether people should be allowed to speak. It was whether platforms had the right, or even the obligation, to draw boundaries around hate. When a space becomes so toxic that users begin to feel unsafe or unwelcome, is that still free expression, or is it simply lawlessness under the guise of liberty? In satirical circles, the conversation evolved into a darkly comic thought experiment. If hate is inevitable online, why not turn it into a business model? Why not put a price on each slur? The joke, of course, wasn't really about making money. It was about highlighting the absurd priorities of systems that seem more focused on monetization than moderation. It exposed a tension, the desire to be seen as a defender of speech clashing, with the need to maintain a space that advertisers and everyday users wouldn't flee in disgust. The most heartbreaking part of this surge wasn't just the slurs themselves. It was the effect on communities who had long fought to carve out safe spaces online. Black users in particular found themselves reliving a kind of digital trauma, watching as their timelines filled with language designed to degrade and dehumanize. For them, this wasn't a theoretical debate about platform policy, it was personal. Each slur was a reminder that progress online is always fragile, and that inclusion is not a default state but a constant effort. Cultural commentators used the moment to ask deeper questions. What does it say about a platform when hate is the first thing that shows up after a major change in leadership? What kind of environment has been fostered when the worst instincts of human behavior respond so enthusiastically to the mere possibility of relaxed oversight? These weren't rhetorical questions. They demanded answers, not just from those in charge, but from everyone who uses and shapes these digital spaces. In a world where so much communication happens online, the tone and health of those platforms matter. When hate surges, even briefly, it affects not just the users who are targeted, but the overall sense of safety and belonging that makes online communities possible. If a space allows hate to thrive, even accidentally, it sends a clear message about who it's for and who it isn't. And when that message spreads, people notice, they remember, and they log off. The viral moment of an executive entering the headquarters of a major tech company carrying a kitchen sink, captioned, "Let that sink in," was a spectacle that quickly became the subject of widespread ridicule. The image itself, a grown adult, walking into a high-stakes business meeting with a sink, seemed almost too absurd to be true. Yet, it happened, and in the days that followed, it sparked a wave of commentary and satire, particularly around the absurdity of using such a literal, simplistic metaphor in a high-profile corporate environment. At its core, the stunt appeared to be a clumsy attempt at humor, but it quickly became a symbol of the dissonance between the image being portrayed and the actual challenges facing the company. The narrative, built on a foundation of bold, sometimes extreme promises of change, began to buckle under the weight of reality. The kitchen sink, intended to signify that everything was being brought to the table, was, in essence, a dramatic way to signal that no stone would be left unturned in the quest to transform the platform. Yet it only drew attention to the absurdity of trying to solve complex issues with simplistic, one-size-fits-all solutions. Satirical takes on the moment flooded social media. Observers mocked the stunt as a metaphor so on the nose that it crossed into the realm of parody. It was as if the very concept of innovation had been distilled into a joke, with the kitchen sink representing a naive approach to serious problems. Memes flooded the internet, pointing out that bringing a sink into a corporate environment wasn't an act of genius, but rather a display of desperation to be seen as a disruptor. Someone willing to go to any lengths, including using cringeworthy humor to stand out. What became clear in the aftermath of the stunt was how disconnected it was from the core issues at hand. The very act of carrying a sink was an attempt to break free from the traditional corporate image, to reject the idea of convention and embrace an image of rugged individualism. Yet it only amplified the feeling that the person behind the stunt was struggling to convey anything of substance. It was as if the entire spectacle was a failed attempt to match the weight of the lofty promises made earlier with a visual representation of boldness and determination. The problem, of course, was that the visual didn't match the reality. In the wake of the stunt, critics pointed out the stark contrast between the attempt to project a fun, cheeky image and the more sobering reality of leading a company through turbulent times. The promises of radical change were one thing, but the actual challenges, ranging from dealing with misinformation to balancing the interests of advertisers, required a more measured, thoughtful approach. The kitchen sink, while memorable, wasn't going to solve the real problems. It was a public relations move, but one that felt like it was trying too hard to be memorable without offering any real solutions. People also began to ask, what was the true purpose of the stunt? Was it to showcase a willingness to be different, to demonstrate that the leadership was unafraid of looking ridiculous? Or was it merely a diversion, a way to distract from the growing sense of uncertainty and controversy surrounding the platform? The moment seemed to be a calculated attempt to deflect from deeper questions. It was an illustration of style over substance, a flashy gesture that, in the end, seemed more focused on grabbing attention than addressing the structural issues plaguing the company. In the comedy world, the kitchen sink quickly became a target of mockery. Jokes about how it symbolized everything but the kitchen sink, everything, that is, except for real solutions, circulated rapidly. It was the perfect fodder for stand-up routines and late-night shows, where the humor was less about the literal act of carrying a sink and more about the broader implications of a leadership style that seemed to confuse spectacle with substance. Comedians, in particular, had a field day with the image, riffing on how the stunt encapsulated the awkward, forced nature of corporate disruption. In a way, the stunt was emblematic of a wider trend in the tech world, a reliance on attention-grabbing moves rather than addressing deeper systemic issues. It spoke to a pattern of behavior where leaders in the tech world often feel the need to perform rather than govern, to provide spectacle instead of strategy. The kitchen sink, while funny in its own right, became a symbol of this performative leadership, where the drama of the moment overshadowed the pressing need for careful, thoughtful problem-solving. The humor was unavoidable, but it came at the expense of the image of someone who, in the quest to appear bold and visionary, missed the mark by failing to take the complexities of leadership seriously. The spectacle served as a reminder of the inherent contradictions in the tech world. While it champions itself as the beacon of innovation and progress, it often falls into the trap of trying too hard to create a persona, whether through stunts or oversimplified solutions, that doesn't match the complexity of the problems it's trying to solve. The kitchen sink, in all its awkward glory, was a metaphor for the platform's inability to address the issues at hand with the seriousness they deserved. In the end, these viral moments and bold actions underscore a deeper issue that often gets overlooked in the rush to disrupt and innovate in the tech world. The constant balancing act between idealism and practicality, between the promises made and the realities faced, reveals the true challenges of leading in such a high-profile, fast-moving industry. Whether it's a CEO walking through the doors of a company carrying a kitchen sink or a monetization strategy that contradicts its foundational goals, these gestures speak volumes about how easily spectacle can overshadow substance. The performative aspects of leadership in this digital age are hard to ignore. While it's easy to be caught up in the drama of attention-grabbing stunts or the allure of radical change, it's also clear that these moments often fail to address the core issues. The shift from free speech advocacy to prioritizing commercial interests, the attempt to monetize verification without real justification, or the acceptance of hate speech in the name of free expression, all of these decisions show a disturbing trend where style and theatrics dominate the narrative over thoughtful decision-making and long-term solutions. In the rush to shake things up, we are reminded that boldness alone doesn't solve problems. Real change requires consistency, clarity, and a deep understanding of the underlying complexities. These viral moments, while often comical or absurd, also serve as cautionary tales. They remind us that leadership, particularly in a digital world with millions of users, demands more than just flashy public appearances or bold promises. It requires humility, the ability to listen, and, perhaps most importantly, a commitment to the long-term health of the platform and the people who rely on it. The users are not just statistics or sources of revenue. They are the very foundation of these digital ecosystems. And in this environment, a meaningful connection with the audience is far more valuable than any viral moment. The conversation also brings to light the evolving nature of social media and digital platforms. What began as an open space for anyone to share their thoughts and build communities has morphed into a highly profitable, advertiser-driven landscape where the rules are constantly shifting. Users, advertisers, and platform executives all play a part in shaping the future, but the stakes are higher now than ever before. As these platforms grow in influence, the responsibility to ensure they foster healthy discourse and genuine connection becomes ever more pressing. It's no longer enough to claim to be a defender of free speech or a protector of user rights. You must also ensure that those ideals are put into action in ways that respect the diverse needs and voices of the global community. Ultimately, the focus should return to what these platforms were originally created for, to connect people, facilitate meaningful conversations, and serve as hubs of knowledge and creativity. To do so requires leadership that not only promises change but also follows through with actionable plans that consider the complexities of an increasingly interconnected world. It means staying grounded rather than getting lost in the pursuit of novelty and sensationalism. The future of these platforms depends on the ability to navigate this balance, ensuring that what is promised is truly delivered, not just in terms of revenue, but in fostering trust, safety, and inclusivity for